In the dead of night, an unexpected phone call rang through the quiet of the Capitol. The recipient, caught off guard by the timing, quickly picked up. The conversation that followed would prove to be a turning point in a political drama no one had seen coming. A carefully planned move had been set into motion, one that would challenge the narrative of the ongoing political struggle. The two voices on the other end discussed strategies, moves, and players, unaware that the entire conversation was being recorded. At first, the call seemed innocuous, just another late-night discussion between political allies navigating the ECI, shifting tides of power. However, beneath the surface, something more significant was happening. What was said during those tense moments would expose a plan years in the making, one designed to manipulate the political landscape for a specific set of goals. The details of this call, recorded and now available to the public, would later shock the nation and spark an investigation into the very core of the political establishment. The individual on the other end of the line, a well-connected figure in the political sphere, had been tasked with executing a sensitive maneuver. The conversation was not just about future plans, but about the strategy to shift the momentum in an ongoing struggle, one that had captured the attention of many. The discussion seemed calm on the surface, but every word, every pause was charged with the weight of a much larger operation. Little did they know, the very nature of their conversation would soon be exposed, and what seemed like a routine political exchange would soon turn into a scandal that would send shockwaves through the system. This midnight exchange was more than just a casual conversation. It was a deliberate, calculated move in a larger game of political chess. The two figures were not just discussing policy or future moves. They were setting the stage for a confrontation that would have far-reaching consequences. The decision to make this call at such an hour, while others were asleep, indicated a sense of urgency. Time was of the essence, and the players involved understood that. They were working against the clock, strategizing how to secure their positions and manipulate events to their advantage. The secrecy of the conversation added another layer of intrigue. Such discussions were typically reserved for private meetings, behind closed doors, away from the prying eyes of the public and the press. The fact that this exchange was being recorded meant that something far more significant was afoot. What was intended to remain in the shadows had been brought into the light, and soon the entire country would know about it. The implications of the call were far-reaching, as it uncovered a web of connections and hidden agendas that had previously been obscured from public view. The recording itself would become a pivotal piece of evidence, one that would shape the political discourse for months to come. As the details of the conversation spread, it became clear that the individuals involved had been operating under a veil of secrecy, crafting plans that would ultimately affect the nation's future. What had started as a seemingly ordinary midnight conversation would soon be the catalyst for a larger, more explosive series of events as the truth behind the plot began to surface. This was not just a story of power and politics, it was the unfolding of a dramatic, high-stakes narrative that would alter the course of history. The recording, once it came to light, exposed a complex web of deceit that had been carefully constructed over time. The individual at the heart of the scandal had long been a central figure in the political landscape, but until now, their role in the unfolding events had been shrouded in secrecy. The tape revealed a series of conversations that were not only revealing in terms of the strategies discussed, but also in the subtle manipulations that had been orchestrated behind the scenes. The conversation, recorded without the knowledge of those involved, offered an unprecedented glimpse into the machinations that had been quietly shaping the political environment. In the exchange, it became clear that the figure involved had been actively coordinating efforts with others to create a narrative that would benefit a specific agenda. The words on the tape, casual in tone yet carefully chosen, exposed the underlying tactics that had been employed to influence public opinion and steer political outcomes. It was a delicate balancing act, one that relied on exploiting weaknesses in the system and manipulating key players to serve a particular goal. What was once thought to be a behind-the-scenes operation now had undeniable proof, and the fallout would be immense. The details of the recording were damning as they laid bear the individual's direct involvement in crafting a scheme that was not only unethical, but borderline illegal. The conversation revealed how the person had been working with other influential figures, pulling strings and coordinating efforts to steer the direction of key decisions. Every word, every pause in the conversation seemed to reinforce the idea that this was a well-thought-out plan, one that had been months, if not years, in the making. What was at stake was not just a single political outcome, but the very integrity of the political process itself. The impact of the tape was immediate, as it opened the floodgates to a series of investigations and inquiries. Those who had previously been unaware of the extent of the manipulation now had a clear picture of the lengths to which the individual had gone to control the narrative. The tape provided undeniable evidence of the person's involvement in an orchestrated effort to deceive the public and undermine the democratic process. The political world was rocked, and the consequences of the revelations would reverberate for a long time. What made the recording so damaging was the revelation of the individual's mindset. It was not just the actions they had taken, but the way they had justified those actions to themselves and others. The conversation showed a person who had become increasingly comfortable with bending the truth, with crafting elaborate schemes that put their personal interests above the public. Good. In the tape, it was evident that the individual had no reservations about using whatever means necessary to achieve their objectives. The ends, as they saw it, justified the means, no matter the cost. As the recording spread, the ripple effects were felt across the political spectrum. Allies began to distance themselves, realizing the danger of being associated with such a high-profile figure involved in such a controversial plot. Public opinion shifted dramatically as more and more people became aware of the deceptive tactics that had been employed. Trust in the political system eroded, and calls for accountability grew louder. What had once been a figure celebrated by many was now seen through a completely different lens, as the full scope of their manipulations came into focus. The exposure of this deception not only damaged the individual's reputation, but also left a lasting stain on the broader political landscape. The consequences were far-reaching, as the trust between the public and their elected officials began to fracture. The revelation of such a carefully constructed plot left many questioning what other secrets might still be hidden, and whether the system could ever be truly trusted again. The fallout from this tape marked a new chapter in the ongoing battle for transparency and integrity in politics, as the exposed figure's role in the unfolding scandal was no longer up for debate. It had been caught on tape for all to see. The call, made under the cover of darkness, was not just a casual discussion. It was the spark that ignited a larger, more intricate plan, one that would have far-reaching consequences. As the conversation unfolded, it became clear that this was no ordinary political maneuver. The person on the other end of the line was not merely talking about minor policy changes or public speeches. Instead, the discussion centered around a carefully crafted strategy designed to tip the scales in their favor, ensuring that certain outcomes would unfold in a way that benefited their own interests. The timing of the call suggested a sense of urgency. As the political landscape shifted around them, those involved knew that the window of opportunity was closing. There were forces at play, unseen by the public, that needed to be navigated swiftly and decisively. The call was a strategic move, a carefully calculated attempt to align certain players in a way that would strengthen their position. They were not just reacting to events, they were shaping them, pulling strings behind the scenes to ensure that they remained in control. What made this conversation so significant was not just the information that was exchanged, but the understanding that every word spoken had a purpose. The individuals involved knew exactly what was at stake, and they spoke with a clarity that reflected a deep understanding of the intricacies of the political world. The plan was not hastily put together. It was the result of months, if not years, of planning, and the phone call was the culmination of all those efforts. The individuals involved were fully aware of the risks they were taking. They understood that their actions, if exposed, could lead to severe repercussions. Yet, despite the risks, the call was made. The conversation was filled with subtle hints of how far they were willing to go to ensure success. It wasn't just about pushing a single agenda. It was about positioning themselves and their allies in a way that would give them the upper hand in the ongoing political battle. Every decision, every move, was part of a larger game that stretched far beyond this one conversation. As the details of the call surfaced, it became clear that it was not just the strategy that was important, but the individuals involved in executing it. There was a sense of coordination, a recognition that each person had a role to play in a much bigger plan. This was not a one-off discussion. It was part of an ongoing process, one that had been set in motion long before this phone call was made. Each step had been carefully thought out, each move calculated to ensure that they remained in control of the narrative. The conversation revealed how these individuals were playing a long game, making decisions that would have consequences not just for the immediate future but for the years to come. They were not concerned with short-term victories. Instead, they were focused on securing a lasting advantage. This was about creating a legacy, one that would be built on their ability to outmaneuver their opponents at every turn. What made the call so striking was its tone, calm, measured, and deliberate. There were no signs of panic or hesitation. The individuals involved were confident in their plan and their ability to execute it. It was clear that they believed they had the situation under control, and they spoke with the authority of those who were accustomed to getting what they wanted. This was not the voice of someone scrambling to fix a problem. It was the voice of someone who had already decided the outcome. As the conversation unfolded, it became increasingly apparent that the call was a pivotal moment in a larger political struggle. It was not just the words exchanged that mattered, but the way they reflected a broader strategy, one that was being carefully orchestrated behind the scenes. Every piece of the puzzle was falling into place, and those involved knew that this was the key to tipping the balance in their favor. The moment the recording surfaced, it sent shockwaves through the political world. What had once been whispered about in backroom conversations was now out in the open, and its impact was immediate. The revelation of the midnight call, captured and shared with the public, exposed a level of deception and manipulation that many had feared but few had anticipated. The individuals involved, once seen as powerful figures in the political arena, were now thrust into a storm of scrutiny, their every action placed under a microscope. The tape revealed more than just the words exchanged. It unveiled a systematic effort to manipulate events and control the narrative. The conversation was filled with careful calculations and deliberate choices, each designed to advance a specific agenda. Those involved were not simply reacting to events as they unfolded. They were actively shaping the future, making strategic decisions about how to bend the system to their will. The true depth of the operation, now exposed, painted a picture of a group determined to preserve their power, even at the cost of betraying the public trust. The fallout was swift and severe. As the tape spread, it became clear that the political landscape was shifting. Allegiances began to crack, and once solid supporters distanced themselves from the individuals at the center of the storm. The impact was not limited to those directly involved. The ripple effects were felt across the political spectrum. For many, the recording confirmed their worst fears about the lengths to which some would go to secure their position. Trust, already fragile, was now shattered beyond repair. The very foundation of the political system seemed to be crumbling under the weight of the scandal. The exposure of such a well-orchestrated plan left many questioning the integrity of the entire system. If such manipulation could happen at the highest levels, what else had been hidden from public view? The tape raised uncomfortable questions about the true nature of power and the lengths some would go to in order to maintain it. For many, the revelation was a wake-up call, a stark reminder of how easily the public can be deceived by those in positions of authority. As the investigation into the events unfolded, it became clear that the consequences would not be limited to those directly involved in the conversation. The broader political system, already under intense scrutiny, was now being forced to confront the reality of how much control a few individuals could exert over the machinery of government. What had once been seen as isolated incidents of questionable behavior now appeared to be part of a larger, more insidious pattern of manipulation. The damage to public trust was profound, and it would take years, if not longer, to rebuild what had been torn down in a matter of days. The recording itself, now an indelible part of the national conversation, became a symbol of the betrayal felt by many. It was a reminder of how power can be abused when those in charge believe they are untouchable. But it also served as a catalyst for change. The public, outraged by the revelations, began to demand accountability in ways that had not been seen before. Protests, hearings, and calls for reform filled the airwaves as citizens across the country found their voices and demanded answers. The recording had not just exposed a conspiracy, it had ignited a movement, a demand for transparency and honesty in government. As the story continued to unfold, the individuals at the center of the scandal found themselves increasingly isolated. The public, once supportive, turned against them with growing intensity. The political climate, already tense, became even more polarized as various factions sought to capitalize on the scandal to further their own agendas. What had started as a single call in the middle of the night had snowballed into a full-blown crisis, one that would alter the course of the political landscape for years to come. The once quiet conversation had ignited a firestorm of controversy, and the reverberations of that moment would be felt for a long time. As the dust began to settle after the initial explosion of public outrage, it became clear that the consequences of the scandal would extend far beyond the individuals directly involved. The exposure of the midnight conversation had not just been a momentary shock. It was a turning point in the ongoing battle for power and accountability in politics. The tape, which had once been a secret recording, became a symbol of the deep distrust that had been brewing for years between the political elite and the public they were supposed to serve. In the aftermath, those at the center of the storm found themselves navigating a complex web of political fallout. The once solid alliances that had been carefully constructed began to crumble. Allies turned into critics, and the once untouchable figures who had long operated with an air of invincibility now found themselves vulnerable to scrutiny and attack. Their power, once secure and unquestioned, began to slip away as the full scope of their actions came to light. But it wasn't just the individuals involved in the conversation who were affected. The entire political system, already fragile, was now under the microscope. The trust that had been lost in the wake of the scandal would be difficult to restore. Public confidence in the institutions that had once been seen as pillars of democracy had been severely eroded. The scandal had exposed a deep-seated dysfunction within the system, one that many had suspected, but few had been able to prove. The once thriving political machine now appeared more like a tangled web of manipulations, deceptions, and half-truths. For the public, the fallout was profound. What had been a quiet frustration with the state of politics soon erupted into calls for sweeping reform. The trust between citizens and their elected officials had been shattered, and the tape served as a painful reminder of the length some would go to in order to protect their own interests. As protests grew and demands for accountability intensified, the power structures that had long held sway began to feel the pressure. The scandal had ignited a firestorm of activism, with citizens rallying for transparency, fairness, and change. In the halls of government, the reverberations of the scandal were felt at every level. Investigations were launched, hearings were held, and reform movements gained momentum. The old political guard, once able to control the narrative, now found themselves scrambling to address the fallout. They were no longer in control of the situation. The public was, and they were demanding answers. What had once been an impenetrable network of influence had been cracked open, and there was no going back. The revelations also forced a reckoning within the political establishment. For too long, many had operated with the belief that they were above reproach, that their positions of power insulated them from accountability. The recording, however, shattered that illusion. It demonstrated that no one was beyond scrutiny, no matter how high their status or how deep their connections ran. It was a reminder that power, when left unchecked, could easily be abused. But it was also a reminder that the public, when united, could hold those in power accountable. Ultimately, the scandal marked the beginning of a new chapter in the nation's political history. The exposure of the plot, the recording of the call, and the subsequent fallout had irrevocably altered the political landscape. For the figures involved, it was a devastating loss, one that would haunt them for years to come. For the public, however, it was an opportunity, a chance to rebuild trust, to demand more from their leaders, and to push for a system that truly represented their interests. The fight for transparency, fairness, and integrity had only just begun, and it was clear that the repercussions of this moment would be felt for generations to come.